It's okay. Chair, that's us live now, so good to go when you are.
Good morning. I'm just testing here. Is the sound working okay?
Yes, Chair.
Just want to test here. Nick or someone could just let me know on the WhatsApp. Yeah. So you can hear me anyway. Yes.
Yeah.
And see me. That's not so bad. Okay, members, I'd like to welcome you to the weekly meeting of the ERA Committee. I'm chairing it remotely today. I normally be in Parliament buildings, so hopefully the technology won't let us down. And if it does, Philip's there on site today, the Deputy Chair. So we're considering an open session here, and we are quoted, so we are. And I want to remind members that keep your microphones muted until it's time to speak, because all background noise will be heard. If you have any questions, please let me know by using the WhatsApp facility. The committee will be broadcast online throughout Parliament buildings, and use your mobile devices as long as they're muted. I want to advise members that at the end of today's meeting, we will commence our deliberations on the Climate Change Number 1 bill, and this will be done in an open session. Closed session at the end of the meeting to discuss any potential amendments as needs be. So, members, first item on the agenda I have here is apologies, and I don't have any. Second is chairperson's business. I want to advise members that the committee clerk received correspondence from the United States Department of Agriculture's Foreign Agricultural Service requesting a meeting with both myself and the Deputy and their diplomats during a visit to Starland on the 28th of September. The purpose of the meeting is to discuss a number of themes, including climate change, capital reform, EU farm to fork, and veterinary trade. Are members okay that we do that meeting? And indeed, I think Nick gave us an order. If any other members wants to attend, I'll be content with that as well. Is that okay?
Chair, yes, indeed. So for other
Thank you.
members.
Okay, members, item number 3 is the draft minutes. It's on the 16th of September. It's at page 6. Are we okay with the draft minutes? Okay. I'll be back in Parliament buildings on Monday, and I'll sign those. Matters arising, number 4. I want to refer to the following: page 4 of the table of papers, a memo from the clerk and Mark Allen on the follow-up issues and additional questions raised at the meeting on the 9th of September. Nick, could you brief the committee, please?
Thank you, Chair, and hopefully members can hear me. Yes, so it's just a very quick memo to follow up on some of the questions that members had raised following the meeting on the 9th of September, and most of this work was undertaken by Mark Allen in Raise. So members did ask a question about the operation of the Scottish Agricultural Modernisation Fund. So Mark has undertaken some research and identified that fund was established following a recommendation of the Scottish Climate Emergency Response Group to set up such a fund. And in response to that recommendation, the Scottish Programme for Government in 2019-20 endorsed the establishment of an agricultural transformation programme that was launched in February 2020 with an initial budget of £40 million. And a key component of that programme has been a capital grant scheme for farmers to purchase specific items of agricultural equipment that have assisted with meeting climate change challenges. And the most recent Scottish Government budget covering the 2021-22 financial year suggests an ongoing commitment to that fund of £40 million. The second item that members sought clarity on was what accounting metric is used across both the United Kingdom and Ireland in relation to accounting for greenhouse gas emissions. And Mark has confirmed that all jurisdictions currently use the global warming potential 100 metric at present. And just to note to members that a request has gone to the department to provide a written briefing on their current ability to assess the emissions of methane from different sources and whether or not they would be able to change metric in the future. There was also a question about the duration or the life of methane and whether there's any current work being undertaken to reduce that. So Mark has identified that at present there appears to be very limited potential to reduce the life of the gas, and the primary focus of research at present is to reduce the level of emissions. And lastly, members had sought some additional information about how small to medium enterprises have been supported in Scotland with regards to Just Transition. So we made contact with the Scottish Just Transition Commission Secretariat as to what they have done, and in their report to the Scottish Government published in March 2021, they had made a specific recommendation about small and medium enterprises, and that specifically focused on investing in training and skills development for SMEs to inform business owners and managers about opportunities available to them and enhance their knowledge about introducing carbon-friendly practices. Also just learned recently that the Scottish Just Transition Commission has been relaunched as of the 15th of September with a new remit to help develop the plans that have been supported by the Scottish Government. We also reached out to Scottish Enterprise, which is effectively an arm's length body with a similar remit to Invest NI, and they offer a suite of services for SMEs in order to support their transition and engagement with eco-friendly practices, including providing education and knowledge, procurement of specialist advice, and they have also administered what they call a low carbon challenge fund, which is a European funded scheme for projects designed to accelerate and enable change at an SME level. So, Chair, that's a very quick summary of some of those outstanding points that the committee had asked for, and very happy to take any further questions or points of clarity members may have on that.
Okay. Patsy, are you hand up there?
I have indeed, Chair. Is there, I think maybe we'll ask for some research, and Nick has amply articulated that around the funds available in Scotland. I think if there's a research paper or further details on that available to us by way of either a link or whatever it might be, that would prove very helpful to our deliberations about the support. Very interested to hear just what they're putting in place there to help farmers with new and innovative practices. So if there are further details that we can look at by way of a briefing paper, that'd be great.
Yeah. Agree with that there, Patsy? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, no problem. Okay, Nick, also on the table of papers, page 8, a memo on the horse racing bill. Nick, have you got a bit of an update on that as well?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, members. I just wanted to table for members today a very brief summary of the call for evidence exercise that we undertook in relation to the amendment bill. So the call for evidence was open from the 25th of June to the 20th of August, and the committee received a total of 8 responses to that from both Downpatrick and Down Royal Racecourse, the Equine Council, the Irish Harness Racing Association, Lisburn and Castlereagh District Council, North West Bookmakers, Run with Passion Limited, and the Turf Guardians Association. And I just wanted to provide members with a very brief summary of the responses. So the vast majority of respondents were broadly positive about the bill and agreed with the overarching objective to facilitate resumption of payments from the fund to Down Royal and Downpatrick Racecourses, as it was recognised that these are essential in order to ensure the long-term sustainability of the courses and support their ability to host high-profile events, which of course help support the local economy in County Down. As we've heard recently, in recent weeks, there was suggestions as to how the fund could potentially be broadened out, and in terms of scope, potentially allowing other forms of racetracks such as greyhound or point-to-point racetracks to access the fund, and indeed other entities that aim to support the sport of horse racing. There were some broadly negative comments on the salient aspects of the bill. There was a stakeholder highlighted concern that the original intent of the 1976 and 1990 orders had been to ensure funds went to non-for-profit organisations, and highlighted a concern that the new operator of Down Royal is effectively a commercial entity. Of course, members will recall that we heard from DAERA last week on that, and they felt that there was no concern in that regard, but it's just a note that that was highlighted in the call for evidence. Most of the respondents were supportive of the change that will be facilitated by Clause 1 of the bill to include the definition of a horse racecourse operator, as this will allow the resumption of payments from the fund. There was also broad support with the proposition that any future changes to operators can be brought about via secondary legislation at the Assembly, which is considered to be a more expeditious and straightforward process than passing primary legislation. In relation to Clause 2 of the bill, which will allow fund claimants to submit financial statements individually or collectively, there was a mixed response from that. There was 3 respondents supported that, but there was a bit of uncertainty from others as to what the rationale for that amendment was, and both Down Royal and Downpatrick in their responses articulated that they wish to continue to submit financial statements separately. So lastly, just by way of summary, in terms of the overarching views in the bill, the vast majority of respondents recognise that allocations from the fund to both of the racecourses are very important to maintain their income, and it's necessary to ensure the long-term viability and sustainability of horse racing activities that have a wider economic benefit. But there were a few suggestions with regards to scope and management of the fund and the licence fees that are charged to bookkeepers in NI, and stakeholders suggested that that might be something the committee may wish to recommend going forward as part of its deliberations. So, Chair and members, that's a very quick and brief run through of the high-level results of the call for evidence, but I just wanted to take the opportunity to put that forward today. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, we are receiving oral evidence later on this morning as well, aren't we, on this?
Yes, that's right, Chair. We have both Down Royal and Downpatrick scheduled to give oral evidence later this afternoon, or this morning, excuse me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay, thank you for that, Nick. And okay, Nick, the next matter there on the table of papers is the October monitoring round, and the department advised that wants to make number of bids, 1.4 million resource funding for inescapable ICT charges, 7.5 million capital funding for which includes 5.4 million to assist the COVID-19 recovery small settles regeneration scheme programme, 2.1 million for rural community schemes, including 1.9 for replacement equipment for community rescue teams, and 0.5 million for rollout of the community ornamental garden scheme. 1.1 million top up to the Rural Business Community Fund. And I want to advise members the committee will receive an oral briefing from the department at next week's meeting, and the briefing paper offers members an opportunity to raise any issues or queries in advance of the meeting. And if any queries in relation to the October monitoring round, can you forward them to Nick by the close of play today? And I should say, just on the issue of funding, the Minister announced the 15 million for the increase to the basic payment scheme yesterday, and I have to say that that has been very welcomed, because I met a lot of farmers throughout the course of the day, and in the middle of a very challenging times that they're facing, that was warmly welcomed. So if you have any other questions relating to or proposals relating to the October monitoring, please forward them to Nick by the close of play today. Okay, members, item number 5 on the agenda is the Northern Ireland Food Strategy Framework, and the briefing paper from the department is at page 15. And I want to advise members that this is a pre-consultation briefing on the framework that has been developed on a cross-departmental basis and has been agreed in principle by the Executive. The purpose is to seek the stakeholder endorsement of the proposed vision, principles and goals of the Northern Ireland Food Strategy Framework. The department envisages the final food strategy framework will be published by March 2022, and the committee will be sent a copy of the consultation document before publication. Members, any questions relating on the pre-consultation briefing, please can you forward them to Nick by the close of play today, and can I seek agreement to write to the department to request an analysis of the consultation responses in due course? Okay. Thank you. Okay, members, we're going to move on now to item number 6 on the agenda. It's an oral evidence session on the climate number 1, and it's from the Environmental Justice Network Ireland, EJNI. The briefing paper is at page 26, and I want to welcome by Starleaf Dr. Ciara Brennan, a lecturer at Newcastle University and Director of the Environmental Justice Network Ireland, and Dr. Thomas Elmunser, and you can correct me if I got that wrong, Thomas, Senior Lecturer at Aberdeen University and Co-Director of the Aberdeen University Centre for Energy Law. And I'd like to invite Thomas and Ciara to take 5 to 10 minutes to brief the committee, and then the members will then ask some questions of you. So you're very welcome this morning, and thanks for your indulgence. I know you've been in the waiting room here for a wee while, so thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Declan, and thanks as well to my colleague Dr. Munser for joining me today for us both to give evidence. I'm going to start off by just introducing who Environmental Justice Network Ireland are, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Tom, who will take you through our full policy submission. So, as Declan has mentioned, my name is Dr. Ciara Brennan. I'm a lecturer in environmental law at Newcastle University in the law school, and I'm the director of the Environmental Justice Network Ireland. In my capacity as an academic, my research focus has been on environmental governance in Northern Ireland and the enforcement of environmental law. And as I've set out in my summary document, which we've submitted as part of our submission, there's my own research has really focused on a history of very problematic environmental governance in this jurisdiction, and specifically on very problematic enforcement of environmental law. And I think what we need to do really when we're examining legislation such as the Climate Bill before the committee today is to remember that we're discussing that in this context where we've witnessed an alarming decline in environmental quality resulting from really what is perceived very widely as systemic failure in terms of governance and mounting concern about the impacts of the climate crisis on an already weakened environment that is having to contend with this legacy of neglect. So I think what has happened over the last few decades is mounting frustration with that set of circumstances led to a small group of activists, NGOs, lawyers and academics, I was one of them, to form the Environmental Justice Network Ireland in 2019. We work very closely with a number of groups of stakeholders in quite a unique way, and I just want to explain that so that you can understand our perspective when it comes to our comments on the bill before the committee today. So what we really want to do is to address the root causes of social and environmental justice deficits on the island of Ireland. And in particular, we look at challenges which are shared across the border. And we do that in a way where it's not just academics working in a silo or lawyers working by themselves or NGOs. We work together to produce high quality evidence-based research outputs which we hope can help to address in a sort of solution-oriented way some of those environmental injustices that we're witnessing. And what we really want to do is to work both at local level, and we've been doing that. We now have an extensive network of people who are lawyers, NGOs, activists, academics across the island, but we also work very closely with partners across Europe to look at EU level and international developments in international law and policy that will impact environmental justice considerations. And obviously one of the key issues that we're dealing with at the minute is the climate crisis and climate injustice flowing from that. So in my capacity as director of EJNI, I'm responsible for oversight of a number of projects. We've just launched one on rights of nature. We're looking at access to justice, the costs of environmental justice. But the project probably most aligned to the committee's business today is our Climate Governance Observatory. And that was launched in June and is a project comprised of a small team, myself, Dr. Munser, Professor Sharon Turner, who unfortunately can't be with us today, but is working at EU level developments around climate action and climate legislation, and our research assistants, Caitlin McElhennan and Patrick Maher. So this small team is working on a project which is designed to provide a platform for thought leadership about options for Paris Agreement compliant and compatible national climate governance and law. And our aim is to try to create this knowledge and to share that knowledge with partners in government on the island of Ireland, across the EU and with the EU institutions as well. So we produced influential policy papers and technical legal analysis of climate legislation at domestic level, but also at supranational level. And I think it's important that we see what's happening here in Northern Ireland as part of a global picture where different jurisdictions are creating climate legislation in an attempt to mitigate and deal with the outputs and the crisis that is emerging related to climate change. So what we really want to do is to talk about in that project national ownership of climate action. So really the bill before the committee today is very relevant to that. And I would refer you to our full opening statement, and I know Dr. Munser is going to go through that in detail. But just before we do, in my own capacity as an academic looking at environmental governance, I just want to make a couple of final comments before handing over to Dr. Munser. I think in relation to environmental governance, which is my own specialist area, it's my opinion that the climate bill under discussion today offers Northern Ireland a chance to depart from what has been a very, very problematic legacy, where successive direct rule and devolved governments have considered us a special case where modern environmental standards need not apply. I think this approach, which is based on some sort of exceptionalism, needs to change. It needs to change urgently. And I think by adopting the targets for reaching net zero that have been set out in this bill, we can move from being considered a climate laggard. We've been considered a laggard in all sorts of environmental indicators in terms of proper modern environmental governance. But in terms of climate change, we're coming quite late to the party here already, and I think that we've been operating some years behind the UK, other parts of the UK, and some years behind what's going on in the Republic of Ireland as well. So I think that by adopting and embracing the need for ambitious climate target, the need for us, for Northern Ireland, to reach net zero and to enshrine that in law, we can move to a jurisdiction that's considered a jurisdiction that recognises both the scale of the challenge and by doing that, we can send a really important message to society about the drastic changes that are going to need to be made in order to avert, catastrophic implications of the climate crisis. But we can also then, avail of the significant economic, political and social dividends which a swift and just transition can deliver. And I think if we drag our feet on this, we will be left behind, as we have been in so many other ways which have resulted in environmental decline on the island. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Munser, who's going to take you through our reflections and in particular his careful analysis as a leader in terms of looking at international comparative climate laws of how we view the climate bill that's before the committee today. So thank you, and I'll hand over to Tom.
Thanks, Dr. Brennan. Could I just confirm with the chair, please, that you can hear me okay?
Yes, Thomas, I can hear you absolutely.
Great, thank you. Nice to be here with you all today. So as Dr. Brennan indicated, I'm Thomas Elmunser. I'm a senior lecturer in energy transition law at the University of Aberdeen, where I co-direct the Aberdeen University Centre for Energy Law, and I lead EJNI's Climate Governance Observatory that Dr. Brennan was discussing. I'm an academic lawyer. I have specialist expertise in climate law, and Palgrave commissioned me to write the first book-length study of the UK's Climate Change Act 2008. And more recently, I published the book National Climate Change Acts, which is really the first major study of national climate change acts selected from around the world. Now, the Committee on Climate Change, or CCC, recently led on and published an extensive report that sets out and analyses UK climate change risk impacts, the independent assessment of UK climate risk, appearing June 2021. Now, the overall message conveyed is that the current and projected severity of climate change is clear, so is the need to tackle it. It's clear that as a simultaneously localised and global problem, these climate circumstances require NI to make a suitable contribution to redressing climate change, both in terms of shielding NI itself from negative projected impacts and in terms of assisting global society and humanity in general. The present bill provides a vital means of engaging in that process. The introduction of the Climate Change Bill by Claire Bailey MLA in March of this year was extremely welcome. And it should be recognised, I think, as a very substantial achievement. The diversity of co-sponsorship and support across a range of prominent parties that the bill has received is also very positive. And it will be recalled that the New Decade, New Approach deal agreed in January 2020 included the commitment that the executive will introduce legislation and targets for reducing carbon emissions in line with the Paris Climate Change Accord, and that the executive should bring forward a Climate Change Act to give environmental targets a strong legal underpinning. And it will also be recalled that in July 2020, the NI Assembly passed a motion asserting the Assembly's demands for the urgent introduction of the Climate Change Act, requesting action from the executive within 3 months. So the arrival of this bill was very helpful in moving things forward. Now, it might be said with some strong degree of justification, I think, that the issue of the level at which a 2045 or a 2050 economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions reduction target should be set at in this type of legislation amounts to a political rather than a legal decision. And while that is indeed the case, in my view, such decision-making should be framed as a legally informed political decision. That is to say, it should be informed directly by broader legal drivers that set the context for the decision and actively inform its outcome. And most importantly, the UK's National Climate Change Act 2008 applies a net zero GHG emissions reduction target to the UK for 2050, measuring that from 1990 baseline emission levels. And it's notable that the economy-wide GHG emissions reduction target of net zero incorporates emissions from the UK as a whole, and that includes NI. Now, if this target is to be achieved, it will require the UK's sub-state jurisdictions to pull together. The Scottish Parliament has mobilised its devolved constitutional powers to push forward, locking in the most substantial sub-state contribution to the UK's net zero 2050 goal via the passage of the Scotland-specific net zero target for 2045. And that means Scotland's making a contribution to the UK reductions drive that improves on the 2050 net zero standard. The Welsh Assembly has a more limited capacity to act in this area due to certain constitutional constraints, but that Assembly has capitalised on the governance space that it does have in a positive way, and it's now also aiming for net zero 2050. Pardon me. Excuse me, NI has the greatest available constitutional capacity to act in the area of climate governance, and so it's very welcome that the Assembly is currently on the cusp of mobilising its legal capacities to pass a Climate Change Act. Now, the National Climate Change Act's net zero target provides, I would suggest, a benchmark against which the NI emissions reduction drive can be usefully measured. This assists the Assembly in arriving at what I would call a legally informed political decision concerning the level of the appropriate NI contribution to the UK's overall mitigation process that should be embodied in this bill. The bill's present 2045 net zero target provides a strong opportunity for NI to move from a position of climate laggard, dragging negatively on the national UK net zero objective, to a position of climate leader, making a contribution to the national mitigation drive that improves on the national average by moving net zero progress to a point in time prior to 2050. However, given that certain challenges faced by NI, including its slower start in working towards net zero and binding law, various regionally specific economic challenges, our proportionally large agricultural sector and similar, it may be arguable that a net zero 2050 figure might form a credible alternative target option for the jurisdiction. This would permit NI to contribute to the mandatory UK net zero drive in a manner that doesn't make it a drag on progress, while also taking into account particular challenges faced by the jurisdiction in the UK's broader setting. So what I've described as a legally informed basis for political reasoning should also take some account of the fact that the European Union has introduced a 2050 net zero target for the collective EU and binding law, the so-called European Climate Law. And Brexit notwithstanding, Northern Ireland surely doesn't want to become a solitary corner of Europe left behind in that push towards net zero. The CCC has recommended an at least 82% 2050 emissions reduction target for 2050, but it appears to be the case that a legally informed basis for political reasoning points to a higher level of ambition. The views on an 82% target articulated in Lord Debon's letter to Minister Putz, dated 1st of April 2021, and indeed in the CCC's 6th carbon budget, in my judgment arguably underscore not that NI should cement the position as a UK climate laggard in law, but that UK government and the national institutions should recognise some of the very particular challenges faced by NI, challenges articulated by the CCC in that 6th carbon budget, and potentially provide a greater degree of support or assistance if or as required. So the national institutions, therefore, should be encouraged to view NI, I would suggest, in just transition terms. A just transition perspective means that in applying a net zero economy-wide target for 2050 for the UK, national parliament and UK government should not perceive themselves as being at liberty to apply the objective in a manner that some might perceive as treating NI as a partial afterthought. NI needs to be a central part of the conversation, the direction of travel, and of the net zero transition itself. So a just transition perspective in this sense means that the national level is at its best, where it takes careful and conscious account of the issues and needs bespoke to the jurisdiction of NI, where it implements a UK-wide target of this nature. And onus arguably falls on NI politicians to underscore the case for this sort of recognition to relevant actors. I'll close in a moment, but just to take an example to flesh this out, carbon capture and storage, or CCS, is intended to form a major part of the UK's emissions reduction policy strategy over the years ahead. However, current national policy options based on CCC policy pathways indicate that CCS is not due to operate in NI on any significant scale due to technical geographic limitations. National policy choices and circumstances of this nature constrain NI from benefiting from one of the UK's major mitigation opportunities and going forward, while expressly enabling those transition opportunities in the UK's other sub-state jurisdictions. So in this sort of scenario, in my view, the following type of thinking is appropriate for UK level actors. This thinking, if we fence NI out of a major mitigation stream, here for example CCS, how do we offset this with other policy choices targeted at supporting NI in its transition to net zero by or before 2050? If the UK level administration isn't asking those sorts of questions of itself, it seems to me that it's appropriate for NI political leaders to ask these questions of the national institutions and to drive that conversation. So just in closing, to sum up, the extent to which the bill proposes to establish a legally binding net zero duty for 2045 is very, very positive in my view. The figure at which this target is to be set is in effect a political decision, but that decision should be legally informed. And in principle, if a net zero 2045 target is employed as set out in this bill, this enables NI to make a UK and indeed world leading contribution to greenhouse gas emissions reduction, where it's on a par with Scotland's pioneering 2045 net zero target. The UK's national administration would be required to work carefully in concert with NI to help support this ambitious but worthy agenda. If this figure is considered to be too stringent, given NI's particular circumstances, slippage beyond the UK 2050 target would not be appropriate in my view, as it would position NI as the UK's climate laggard, a European laggard, and one participating in the single electricity market with an EU country, the Republic of Ireland, and indeed a jurisdiction that is not sufficiently responding to the climate challenge based on IPCC advice and the requirements of the Paris Agreement. I'll close there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. That's very helpful, and Ciara as well. There's a number of members going to have a number of questions asked here. I suppose there's a couple of points I just want to raise before I pass round. Ciara, you said there that you know, if we, and Thomas, you said as well, if we didn't pass legislation in line with the Paris Agreement, that we would be the only corner of the EU that hasn't met net zero by 2050. Do you have any views on how that would impact on our international reputation and indeed our ability to trade and engage with other regions across the EU and across the island as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'll hand over to Dr. Munzer for sort of a breakdown of that. But I think from my perspective, there's a number of issues at play here. If we fail to put in place a net zero target, we will be damaging our reputation, which is already not great in terms of environmental governance and regulation. I mean, we were the subject of multiple EU infraction proceedings going back decades already, so we were perceived in many sectors as the dirty corner of the UK, the dirty corner of Europe. We've got one of the biggest illegal dumps in Europe, up in Maboy near the border, and we've got very serious problems in terms of meeting all sorts of environmental quality indicators, things that don't just stop at the border, like water quality, biodiversity, soil quality, all of those issues. So we've already got a problematic reputation. Setting in place a net zero target would go some way to improving that reputation, because it would indicate and signal to other jurisdictions, but also to our own public, that we are serious and we understand the scale of the challenge that needs to happen. There's also another issue that, if we don't make the shift to a low carbon economy, then other jurisdictions are going to do that, and then we will be seen to have some sort of competitive advantage because we're not implementing changes at the rate they need to happen. And I think that's highly problematic, because that won't be suffered by other countries that we would wish to export to as well. So there's clear trade implications for that. I think that any jurisdiction that doesn't make the changes swiftly to a low carbon economy in all sectors of their outputs, agriculture, building, industry, that's not going to wash for very long with other jurisdictions who are making the necessary sacrifices. So I think that we either make the changes now or we're left behind. And if we get left behind now, we could be left behind forever, because we just will never be able to meet those standards that other jurisdictions are meeting. So that's my take on it, but I'll hand over to Dr. Munzer for his view.
Yes, thanks for the question. I think it's interesting too, if we acknowledge that we share a land border, and fleshing out a response to this, the Republic of Ireland for starters, I think we can point to some perhaps sort of concrete problems that may quite clearly arise. So if we don't keep pace with, let's say, the EU and the Republic of Ireland in this regard, I imagine we'll see some very particular changes where we can, in essence, lose out. So we have to ask, how can we compete when our neighbours will be going through, let's say, radical changes to the EU vehicle fleet, establishing new infrastructure driven by these sorts of targets, increasing numbers of battery charge points on roads and this sort of thing. You cross the border, you come to Northern Ireland, we haven't ruled out that sufficient level of infrastructure by comparison. That's a problem for the jurisdiction. NI businesses operating in renewables and so on will likely look to better incentives elsewhere in the UK and the EU to do research, to do business and development where it's best supported and so forth. And I think we can broaden that out as well to even acknowledge commentary within the UK. So the CCC is saying that reaching net zero will cost less than sort of 1% GDP a year. I think the figure was through to 2050. Military defence budget is 2% a year for starters, and as part of this post-Brexit COVID recovery, a green recovery is being focused on. This is supposedly a key job generator, a white knight for the economy. So internally within the UK as well, I'd emphasise, Northern Ireland wants to be part of that. It wants to benefit from that in the same way as the rest of the UK. And in terms of how that connects with the wider EU and so forth, again, we want to be on a par with these sort of emerging green markets. We want to benefit from those. We don't want to start slipping behind, be it in terms of attracting inward investment, R&D, drawing renewable subsidies into our local economy, or the example with roads infrastructure I pointed to, even falling behind in certain aspects of our infrastructure. So for all those sorts of reasons, it's very useful if we can keep pace with the green economic boom and indeed be a leader in that area. Thanks.
And just briefly then, before I move around, do you see in terms of what would be, say if we went for the 82% reduction and not net zero, what would that mean for the North in terms of, say, our air quality water quality and soil quality. What would that mean for us? And given the fact that we're in a single island, there's going to be transboundary issues as well. What would that mean for us in terms of environmental actual standards and the air we breathe and the water we drink? What would it mean compared to net zero in 82%?
Well, I suppose, I have a couple of comments just to make at the outset. To me, there's two issues here. One of those, with setting an 82% target, is sort of uncertainty. I don't think that without having some sort of end goal, which we know we have to get to net zero, we know that, without having a certain process by which we do that and by a certain time, I think that would leave lots of room for, too much policy, disagreement in different areas about which sectors are going to actually work together to make that reality happen. So I think that there's an uncertainty issue. And I also think that, as I said before, there's a signalling issue about what an 82% versus a net zero target actually means. I think that what we need to do is signal to the whole island, but beyond the island to the UK and Europe, that we appreciate the really drastic and irreversible changes in societal behaviour that are going to need to happen to meet that target. And by saying, we'll do it at some point later down the line, but we'll settle for 82% now, I just don't think that's going to cut it in terms of signalling to society the drastic nature of the changes that are going to have to be made to meet those targets. So I'll hand over to Tom then, I think, to comment further on that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. I suppose on one hand, Chair, it would take scientists to sort of, answer that in direct terms, but coming to a sort of taking a sort of legalistic response, being a lawyer, I think one benefit of this bill, I think one positive feature is, as we know, it proposes the creation of climate action plans. As we know, within those plans, they're sort of predicated on two main features. We have targets, we have measures, and when we look at the targets, we find proposed the creation of biodiversity targets, soil target, water targets. And when you look across the piece of climate legislation, I think it's fair to say that that's quite a sophisticated characteristic of this bill. It's not a common feature to find those sorts of targets being created in this type of climate legislation, and certainly in this way. And that speaks to the theme of your question, this notion that when we establish a target, you discuss the 82% target, or point to that, of course, that the CCC recommended and so forth. We must recognise that within a framework like this, a target like that is kind of bound up with these different characteristics and features: air, water, soil. And the legislation, in essence, provides a reminder and underscores the point that when we deal with climate issues and mitigation, we are dealing with air, we are dealing with water, we are dealing with soil issues. They're baked into the cake of the climate emergency. So the legislation, I think, takes quite a sophisticated approach to these issues. And while a scientist could answer to the sort of more scientific outcomes of that 82% target, of course, it seems to be the case quite clearly that if the legislation can apply a more robust target, so a target that is stronger, let's say, than the 82, 20, 50% target that's proposed, it will therefore be taking a stronger approach to tackling problems in the sphere of air quality, problems in the sphere of water quality, and so forth. So on those grounds, if the legislation can ramp up that target, it would seem to me legislatively it is attending in a superior way to problems arising with air quality and so forth that you point to.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to move around the room here. We have quite a number of members who want to ask questions. Patsy? Patsy?
Sorry, somebody's... Anyway, back to the mechanics of working this thing. Sorry, if we could just... good to see you. Thank you very much again for your inputs, Ciara and Thomas. Now, I'm very interested in exploring this further. You repeatedly referred to the decision being legally informed. Legally informed by whom? Or is it by Paris? Is it by EU? Is it by the practicalities of the entire country of Ireland, where it's 2050 in the Republic? Legally informed, if you could expand just what you mean by that, and which direction. I seem to glean that you have a preference for 2045. But the evidence that we heard from Lord Deben and the Climate Change Committee was that that would be imposing almost an impractical, impossible target to deliver. So can you just expand for me, please, Thomas, what you mean by legally informed?
Yes, thanks very much for the question. It might be useful to start with the CCC point you raised, which is a very good and legitimate point. I think let's put the CCC in context, first of all, and in legal terms. So the CCC, as we know, I'm sure, was established by the Climate Change Act 2008. Part 2 of that Act establishes the CCC, and a schedule to the Act, in essence, expresses its constitution. And what the CCC was established to do and does, based on the legislation, is to function as, well, first off, it's independent. It's not part of government, of course, so it's not a policy-setting body. And it has an advisory function and a reporting function. So reduced to its essentials, it's an advisory and reporting institution when we interpret the law, and I'm sure Lord Deben would more than confirm that in the CCC and consider that to be its raison d'etre. So it fulfills a very particular function. It's a very important body. It's highly respected, including by me. And when it issues an opinion like the 82% figure you talk about in the letter to Minister Putz on the 6th carbon budget and so forth, that's very important. It should be listened to. It's our leading edge expert advisory body in many respects. So that is one feature that should be factored into our approach to calculating this target, which, as I emphasised in the opening statement, I'm sure Lord Deben would agree, is ultimately a political decision. So it's not a decision to be taken directly by the CCC, which isn't a policy-setting body, but as you imply, I think we absolutely must take on board and factor in very strongly the CCC's advice. So it must be qualified in those terms. Now, in terms of this legally informed decision I speak to, it's partly as a consequence of my expertise or legal expertise. I'm not an atmospheric scientist or something like that, of course, but I think it's useful to recognise, and what I mean by that really is that we have a Climate Change Act in place that requires a net zero target for 2050 for the UK as a whole. Northern Ireland is subject to that, although the legal duty is on the Secretary of State for BEIS, of course, but it provides a context, a legal framing context when you are fleshing out this political decision that is required to be made. And when we look across the small pond, our friends and neighbours in Scotland, of course, we see that 2045 target's been put in place in legally binding law. That's important to recognise, and I think it would be an influential consideration. Where does Northern Ireland want to gauge itself in relation to the overall performance required it's subject to? Does it want to be a slight drag on the national performance? If that's avoidable, how can we do that? Can we improve on an 82% target in that regard? And again, we need to recognise, I would suggest, taking this legally informed position, that the Republic of Ireland, with whom we share a border, is doing particular things, going for net zero 2050, and that's part of an overall EU project now that the EU climate laws come in as well. So we need to be very careful that we don't end up, in a sense, falling behind, and I don't just mean that in terms of meeting a superficial target. I mean it with reference to all the sorts of things we pointed to, our green infrastructure, attracting inward green R&D, bringing renewables incentives into our economy and so forth. So, thank you.
Yep. Now, just if I could pick up on that point, I'm reading there today from some economists about the vastly increased north-south trade that there is. So increased north-south trade means increased north-south transport. So would the logic not take that you need to have harmony of standards right throughout the entire island? If that was the case, if standards for transport, standards for vehicles, you're talking about water quality, air quality, all those things that are impacted by that too.
Well, thanks again for the question. I mean, you raise an interesting point. I think harmony of standards is something that, is probably a relevant consideration. It's probably maybe a complicated political consideration. I think probably what strikes me is maybe more salient, at least given my sort of expertise and interest, is this notion of concrete problems that will arise where whether or not we necessarily harmonise the standards where we may be in a situation where, let's say, if the Republic of Ireland has a fairly stringent net zero target for 2050 and we don't, we see subtle changes that maybe aren't predicated on standardization, but more complex market shifts and so on. So if our road infrastructure starts falling behind, to put it crudely, where we don't have, let's say, sufficient charge points and so on to deal with extensive electric vehicles that may be doing business, maybe travelling, the Republic of Ireland has that type of infrastructure developing. It's a serious concern for us that we might fall behind in those regards. As to the extent to which standards should be harmonised in terms of regulation and so forth, I'm not entirely sure, but I think we should be concerned about those tangible changes.
And if I could add to that as well, I mean, I think there's a cautionary tale that we can look to as well from what happened in the early 2000s in relation to disparities in control in the context of waste regulation. And I think it's useful to look back at experiences we've had across the border in environmental regulation in the past when we're looking forward to how we're planning for dealing with regulation and issues associated with the climate bill. So when there were disparities in control, there were differences in gate fees, landfill tax, all sorts of elements of regulatory control imposed on waste. And we saw huge degrees of illegal transfrontier shipments of waste, cross-border illegal dumping, and we're still living with the legacy of that today. And I think that points to what happens whenever two jurisdictions that share an island, that have a very, very porous border with hundreds of potential crossing points, don't collaborate and produce standards that try to meet equal standards. And at that point, we did have some. We were, all within the EU at that point, so we were all trying to meet, the waste directive standards. So, I think that obviously there has to be conversations about, having approaches, common approaches within the UK, common standards, but also common approaches on the island. Because, I mean, let's face it, these are shared challenges. Many of the issues associated with the climate crisis are shared on this island. And I think that, there would be problems if there weren't discussions, very clear discussions had about, harmonisation of at least some elements of targets that we're going to be dealing with either side of the border.
Okay, thanks very much for that. And Chair, it's not a political point, but we've just heard fundamental, very, very important, good reasons why North-South Ministerial Council on environmental issues should be meeting frequently and with urgency.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Patsy, thank you very much. Harry?
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Dr. Brennan and Dr. Munser. Dr. Brennan, you mentioned environmental decline on the island. I'm just wondering where and what in Northern Ireland concerns you or attracts your attention most. That would be, as you say, environmental decline. What were you thinking of in particular? Thank you.
Well, I suppose, in my own work, we work very closely with NGOs and with activists who are really at the front line of environmental problems. We're seeing issues really across all environmental indicators. So you have some gains in terms of, we've recently seen some successes in terms of nature reviving, but we also see decline in the quality of protected sites. We've seen, species, and the biodiversity crisis become very, very clear with decline in the number of species that are visiting the island, migrating birds and issues like that. But we do have very significant problems with the level of pollution in our rivers and lakes. That's been evidenced, very clearly. You don't have to look into scientific reports to get this. It's on the news when you see fish kills every week, and that's a sort of shocking, indicator of the quality of water in our lakes and rivers. We've got soil quality issues. We've got, water purification issues, which is eventually going to probably end up in water charges because it's going to cost so much to purify the water that is drinkable. We've got, as I've mentioned before, one of the biggest illegal dumps in Europe sitting right beside a tributary, the Fawn River, which leads into Derry's water supply. It's also in very close proximity to a number of protected areas that are of international scientific importance and biological significance. Air quality is an issue. We've got, interest from, air quality monitors, children's asthma, all sorts of respiratory diseases that are associated with our air quality as well. I could go on. I think the point is that across almost all indicators, we've seen biological decline, and that over a period of years, that's indicative of a failure to regulate polluting industries to the level that they need to be regulated. And I think that's something that has happened across the island. It's happened in the north of Ireland, in the south of Ireland. It's happened on a cross-border basis, and it's something that environmental campaigners have been talking about for some decades. There's increasing public concern, and there's a lack of trust in the organisations and the structures, the governance structures that are designed to deliver proper regulation of those polluting industries. So I suppose my concern is all-encompassing. I think systemic failure has been a phrase used before about our regulation of the environment, and the planning system as well comes into that. So we've got concern about gold mining, we've got concern about planning permission given when it shouldn't be, we've got decline of our historical and environmental heritage. And I think, so my concern would really be across almost all indicators, without wanting to be alarmist.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. And can we question Dr. Munser? Is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm just wondering what consideration you've given the rural impact, especially on our agri-food industry. It would concern me a wee bit about you saying our targets, if we don't do this, we're dragging our heels. And you mentioned a dirty corner of Europe, which I hope we're not. But anyway, my concern would be the impact on the agri-food sector, more important than our dragging behind in the Europe,
Yes, thanks for the question, and yeah, you raised an important point. And respectfully, I don't think I used the term dirty corner, but of course I did express concern that we may fall behind the rest of Europe as it moves forward towards these 2050 goals, and the impact that may have economically as well as, I suppose, morally, in the sense that we want to do our best to try and mitigate this climate problem. Yeah, I mean, you raise a very important point. My view is slightly moving beyond my direct legal expertise, but my view is that, well, linking it to law, we're really dealing with economy-wide transitions. These are economy-wide, they're pervasive, socially pervasive. There are certain sectors that will face certain challenges in certain contexts. Obviously, in our case, our agricultural sector faces particular challenges because of its proportionally high quotient of emissions, and indeed, it is a notoriously tricky sector to regulate. I mean, I've often described energy generation as sort of low-hanging fruit of the transition. We moved on that quite quickly in the UK. Agriculture poses some slightly more embedded challenges. Those are serious challenges. The voices and views of the agri community are very, very important. And I feel we need to get together behind this project and move towards a reasonably stringent target together as a community based on mutual support. And that's partly baked into the cake of the bill in the sense that if you look at how it's structured, of course, it mandates the creation of climate action plans that allow policy approaches really to be fleshed out over time in a way that it seems to me can be sensitive to the various different needs and challenges across sectors. What it's fundamentally doing, of course, is applying a headline target. And so as that target is received down towards sectors, one does need to be careful to support agri in a very careful way. But I think if we look at what's happening in that sector, and members will be much more over the detail than I am, but there are a lot of encouraging signs already. I mean, I think it's called ARC Zero. I know it's a small sort of group of farms, but these are farms that are pioneering or trying to pioneer net zero farming. That's really encouraging. It's very impressive. It's in partial direct response to the things we're talking about. We've had, even just wonderful improvements in the spreading of slurry technologically, so it can be done in a more environmentally friendly and useful way. Those sorts of examples point to the capacity to innovate within the agri community, to technological developments that will come online as we move forward in time. We're dealing with a long-term transition here, and I would underscore there obviously are various policy approaches we have now that can support the agri community with this challenge, but I would underscore what I was pointing to in my opening statement as well. I think we should be taking a just transition approach, as I describe it, in the UK setting, where the national level, national actors have a particular obligation to be very cognizant of our circumstances and potentially provide some degree of particular support and really help with technological development in the agri sector and the rollout of necessary means and mechanisms. The last thing I'd say is, again, I'm not an environmental economist, but you constantly rub up against these devices in law. There are many ways, many devices we have to improve agri, as we know. More will come online, more will be developed. These targets will help incentivise that. We should have, I think, broad strategic support from the broader UK and sticky areas as well, as Scotland does, for example, in the sphere of oil and gas. But there are other mechanisms, international carbon credit purchases and so on, that can be operationalised in the sphere of climate economics. I wouldn't encourage those as a mechanism for contributing to agri per se, but there are other devices. There are even, as we probably know, so-called clean development mechanisms under the international legal regime that allow credits to be accrued for supporting projects in developing countries and so forth. So it's a complex picture, but those sorts of solutions, innovative action, and probably a can-do attitude and mutual support, I think can overcome challenges in that sort of sphere, notwithstanding the fact that you do raise a very important question.
Okay, thank you very much, both doctors. Thanks.
Okay, members, we're moving on here to Claire. Now, I just want to say, extremely interesting topic. With 5 speakers left and our broadcasting time is starting to count down on us, so I wonder if it would be possible just to keep the responses as focused as possible. Hope you don't think I'm being ignorant in saying that there. I don't want the clock to run down on us. So, Claire? Claire?
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Great, thanks. And thank you, Dr. Brennan and Thomas Elmunser, for being with us. There's loads in what you're saying, and it's been really, really helpful. But maybe I want to focus on, obviously, environmental governance and standards historically have been really bad in Northern Ireland. And I'm wondering how you feel about the importance of independent oversight and monitoring for any climate legislation, regardless if it's this bill, another bill, or some bill in the future. But how important is that independent oversight, do you feel? And do you feel that enforcement within a bill or piece of legislation should be embedded as well?
I'll actually, in the interest of brevity, as Declan has mentioned, let Dr. Elmunser deal with this in the main. However, I would point to the fact that the collapse in public trust that we have seen through talking to our NGOs and activist collaborators in EGNI is largely down to a complete collapse in trust in the structures that are there, and that is because they're not seen as independent, they're not seen as properly accountable, and they're not seen as there's no proper oversight of independent environmental regulation in Northern Ireland. And I think that harks back to a debate we're all very familiar with, which is the absence of an independent EPA. There are some lessons I think we can learn from that when it comes to thinking about what kind of accountability and oversight we require for the climate bill, in relation to this context. But I'm going to hand over to Dr. Elmunser, who will deal with the question of accountability and oversight in relation to this particular bill.
Thank you. Yes, and thanks for a very good question. Obviously, there's probably a lot we might say about, in addition, about externalisation of the environmental regulator and so forth. But coming to the bill in particular, independent oversight in this type of legislation, research shows, so national framework climate legislation or sub-state framework climate legislation in this case, research shows that independent oversight is a very, very useful device. There's been quite a bit of work done. Well, I suppose I should just emphasise that, as we recall, the first act of this type was the Climate Change Act 2008, and it established the CCC. By this time, there's been a reasonable amount of research done on the role, influence, importance of the CCC, and that research points to the general conclusion that it's been a very, very useful institution in the context of the low-carbon transition in the UK, and it's generally pointed to really as a sort of best practice component of that legislation. So I think that speaks to the theme of this notion that independent oversight in the narrower context of this type of climate legislation is useful. By oversight, in terms of the CCC, of course, we're referring to its functions as articulated under the Climate Change Act 2008. So we're thinking really in terms of advisory and reporting type of oversight. If we move on to Well, I suppose it's probably worth remarking as well that there may be opportunities, given the way in which the bill proposes to open the Climate Office for Northern Ireland and so on, the Climate Commissioner, to perhaps augment some of those useful sort of oversight capacities at our local scale in the context of the bill itself. So that's arguably a very positive innovation of the bill, I should say, Claire. But in terms of enforcement, I mean, legally, that's a very complex area in the narrow context of these sorts of frameworks. But I suppose a headline issue with enforcement really has been, and it's something I think we would probably want to be very cognizant of in the context of this bill, has been, if you, to sort of try and put it as succinctly as I can, where you take a sort of economy-wide climate target of the type that we see for 2050 in the UK Climate Change Act, it sort of maybe feels a little normal to us now, as in your case legislators and so forth, but legally that's a very exotic thing. What we're doing is applying an economy-wide emissions reduction target to society. That's very exotic legally. It's nothing like you find in contract law or typical criminal law. So because it's rather new and exotic, it means that the law, in a sense, struggles to accommodate some of the outworkings of those sorts of targets, and that really shows up in the area of enforceability. So to take a concrete example, if we took the 2020 target under the UK Climate Change Act, which sat at 34%, that's the target embedded under Section 5, it's 1.1 as the net zero target. We had a 34% emissions reduction target for 1990. We were required to achieve. The duty was on the Secretary of State for Bays. Now, that target was achieved in and around 2017. If it hadn't have been achieved, what would have happened in terms of enforceability? It's not that easy to be clear on what would have happened. A failure to secure that duty would have been judicially reviewable. One would have undertaken the JR against the Secretary of State for Bays. If that duty had been breached, if the target had been missed, we hadn't hit that 34%, probably what the courts would do would be to issue declaratory relief. So it would declare a breach of the duty. But beyond that, it's very, very difficult to see what the courts could actually do. So without getting further into the weeds of technical law, we see that when we think about enforceability in the context of these acts, they can pose legal challenges by virtue of their very novel nature, if I can put it like that. And in terms of our bill then, or the bill before us today, I think we want to bear those issues in mind, and one may want to kind of revisit where the duty to secure the proposed net zero 2045 target is located. If that duty was placed on, Minister for Dara or the Executive Office, or however you more enlightened legislators might frame that, it sort of pegs that to a particular actor, which can be useful. And once we do that, we still find there are some other difficulties in the area of enforceability. So I've taken a sort of micro example in terms of enforcement there to point to some of the novel challenges arise, but it speaks to a broader theme about enforcement in this relatively new and novel area of law. So thank you for the question.
Okay.
That's great. Listen, hopefully two quick ones if I can, just to follow up. First, just following on from that, do you guys feel that there is sufficiently skilled people with expertise that could fulfil a monitoring or an independent oversight role for Northern Ireland? And then maybe just a wee quick one for yourself, Thomas. When you were mentioning with the CCC's recommendation that Northern Ireland isn't sort of primed to take CCS capacity, what other type of mitigation measures do you feel should be implemented then in terms of a just transition kind of approach? So if we can't get CCS technology, what should GB or Westminster be looking at putting in place in Northern Ireland to balance us up?
Can I please emphasise the succinct, because we've been doing answers for an hour, which is fantastic, and we have 4 speakers left. So if you just be as precise as you can, because we want to get to our 4 speakers very, very quickly, because we have to move on to the next topic because our members are there. So thank you, Thomas or Claire.
I can take the first question from Claire quickly there. I think in terms of the skills for independent oversight, I think what we need to remember is that climate change is ultimately caused by human behaviour, but its impacts are identified, qualified and quantified by science. So I think that when we're thinking about, people who would serve this independent oversight function, we need to remember that it needs to be a science-based oversight and it needs to be independent from politics. It needs to really reflect and deliver oversight that, takes into account Northern Ireland's unique position relative to the UK, shared island responsibilities with the Republic, and as part of kind of the global race. So you can see the sort of people that would need to come into that would need to have that sort of skill set. So that would be my take on that. And I'll hand over to Dr. Munser for his remarks on the second question.
Thank you. And yes, I think there may be some upskilling required in certain areas, Claire, but that's an opportunity I think Northern Ireland can rise to rather than a problem, let's say. To the second point around the CCS issue, what other sort of mitigation factors could fill the gap? I mean, I think there are probably many examples, and it's part of a bitty little puzzle as we apply this to transport, and we apply this to energy efficiency and so forth, and link that together. So it would probably take me quite a while to go through the suitable solutions to that. But just, I think briefly, the broader point, and I think you point to, Claire, in your question, is that where we see, I mean, I happen to work in Aberdeen, and there are vast sums of money are coming into Aberdeen, which is the hub of North Sea oil and gas, to enable an energy transition zone to reskill workers and so forth so that they can participate in the green economy. If you trace where the money's coming from, a lot from the Scottish Government, a lot from UK Government and from all sorts of investment streams. So note that I said UK Government there. I think a broad principle is that where you have a particular sectoral problem, as Scotland has when it comes to oil and gas, being a hub of oil and gas, and of course we're mitigating that, tamping it down, there's a recognition that support is needed. Where we have a particular thorny issue that may arise, say, in particular challenges occurring in the agri sector, I think UK Government and other national actors want to have an eye on us as well and think, well, what can we do to assist meeting the Northern Irish administration, of course, more than halfway, which is also doing its bit. So it's a sort of broader principle, I think, of just transition sharing of burdens in that context. Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Thank you, Claire. William? William?
Can you hear me okay?
Got you?
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and can I thank both our guests for their presentations. I'll make my questions quite simple. You both are aware, and you're all aware, that the Climate Change Committee has looked extensively at this and came up with recommendations. Do you agree with the Climate Change Committee's findings or not?
In brief, I think that what we need to look at, as I've said before, is that Northern Ireland's unique position as part of a shared island, as part of the UK, and as part of a broader global effort here. And I think that there's possibly a blind spot in some of the recommendations that has been acknowledged by the Climate Change Committee in terms of how they came up with that 82% figure. So that would be my personal take on it, but I'll pass over to Tom in case he has a divergent view on that.
Yeah, just very briefly, thank you for the question, important question. That advice, I think we need to contextualise it briefly. We're receiving that figure from an advisory and reporting body, highly respected, should be listened to, should be factored very strongly into political considerations. Is it a policy setting body? No. So in that sense, we should listen to the view, respect it, factor it into deliberations, but it's one strong factor amongst several others. So that is my view.
Would you accept that the Climate Change Committee did say that in every scenario that they looked into, the Northern Ireland could not reach net zero by 2050? In every scenario that they looked at.
May I briefly? Yes, may I briefly take this?
I think that leaves out some other considerations which are relevant to Northern Ireland's ability or not to meet that net zero target. And I think it's very important that we look at the island as a whole, as Northern Ireland's place in the global effort to reach net zero. And I think we also look at other sources of advice. There's been evidence from the Tyndall Centre as well that has indicated that it is within reach to meet those targets sooner than that. So I think, from my perspective, we need to look at a range of advices, and that is built into the plans in the climate bill before us today. So Tom, unless you have any.
They also make the point that when Northern Ireland reaching 82% by 2050 ensures that the UK as a whole reaches net zero by 2050. And we are part of the UK. So in effect, we reach net zero as being part of the UK by 2050.
Yes, may I just briefly comment, and thanks for the questions. Mr. Irwin, you're quite correct that in terms of the scenario pathways the CCC looked at, they did conclude that it wasn't possible to reach net zero by 2050, but we also just need to briefly unpack the premise of that. They looked at 5 distinct scenarios. They didn't look beyond that or more widely, which could have been the case. And as I think has been much underscored, the now famous quotation, there was no purely technical reason why net zero was not possible in Northern Ireland, of course, was stated by the CCC and the 6th carbon budget. Just briefly, I would also flag another quotation that gets passed by on that page. The CCC says, the analysis carried out in this report, which pertains to the 5 pathways you rightly allude to, suggests that NI achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions is not necessary for the UK to meet its climate targets. Not necessary, but if we replace that with desirable, is it desirable for us to try and hit that net zero 2050? It would drive, I think, what we could call a 6th pathway of calculation. I think the CCC could get that over the line in terms of its calculations quite easily.
I mean, just may add one comment. The agri-food sector, which is a very large sector in Northern Ireland, provides 100,000 jobs in Northern Ireland, has grave concerns. And you'll be aware of that, of the issue of reaching net zero by 2045. They have grave concerns that could damage industry a lot, and in turn ensure that we import food from other regions of the world that has much less, are creating much more to global warming than we are. That'll be a concern that I would have.
Okay. Okay then, William, thanks for that. Okay, I'm going to move swiftly on to Philip and Rosemary. Philip?
Thanks, Chair. Can I just thank Dr. Brennan and Dr. Elmunser for the evidence that they've provided today. I mean, just briefly, I mean, there's been a lot of conversation about the importance and the impact of environmental practices on the island. Can I just ask, on the back of that, you know, with regard to this bill, I mean, are they satisfied with the kind of transboundary nature of clauses or aspects of this bill? Is there anything in it that they would like to see strengthened in terms of all-island cooperation so that as a shared island we can move towards net zero?
Well, I mean, I think all of our projects in Environmental Justice Network Ireland are considering how best we can work in any aspects of environmental protection, you know, not just climate, but beyond that, other indicators, soil quality, air quality, you know, river and water quality. And I think that when you share an island with, you know, it's obvious to say that you know, the environment doesn't stop at the border, and any kind of meaningful attempts to protect our most precious asset, which is the environment, must be done in collaboration. And we've seen before, as I've mentioned, what happens when that doesn't happen. So I think that climate is no exception to that, and that discussions, you know, we've been going through processes where there's been 3 climate goals on the island, you know, developing at the same time. We're a very, very small island, you know, in a windy Atlantic Ocean on the, you know, the outskirts of Europe. And I think that the time has come now to very carefully think about what we can gain and what gains can be made from meaningful collaboration north and south of the border, rather than just problematizing the border itself. You know, what can we do better together to, you know, make a swift and just transition to low carbon economies on the island, you know, and to set that within the bigger context of Northern Ireland and within the UK, Northern Ireland within Europe, and Northern Ireland within the global environment as well. So that would be my take on it, you know, that there definitely needs to be, in any kind of environmental conversations, very, very close consideration given to what we can do better as a whole on the island.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that. Okay, Philip, and the last speaker is Rosemary.
Thank you. Just one quick question. I have issues. You rightly recognise there are issues with the agricultural community, agri-food community. Now, if the agricultural community has to cut down on its livestock numbers, etc., for the production of food. This food is going to be sought from elsewhere. And my concern would be the transferring of looking for this food, the transferring of resourcing this, or looking for this food perhaps to South America, and them importing it to Northern Ireland and England in relation to their production actually causes, it's much more harmful in relation to the greenhouse gas than what we have in Northern Ireland. So have you comments to make on that? You know, we're actually shifting the problem to a third world country, or not to another country, and they have already said that they're not going to pay heed to the problems that we have in relation to climate change. They're going to cut down so many more forests. It's widely reported.
Shall I comment on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I think it's a legitimate question. These are real and legitimate concerns. I think, again, just to touch on the legislation, we need to recognise that the climate action plans are moving gradually, fleshing out policy gradually in a way that is intending to balance the burdens across sectors. So, of course, this isn't an act that is putting tremendous pressure on agri and relatively light pressure in other sectors. It's a mutually managed process in the context of the headline target. I think if we look at, you will have more expertise, Rosemary, than I in terms, I'm sure, of credible policy options right now in the agri sector to manage some of these problems. But if we run through the 6th carbon budget, there's a range of very useful policy options sketched out by the CCC that can help us manage and improve in these types of areas, and also by bringing in these sorts of targets and balancing the burdens across other sectors. We also stimulate action, activity like ARC Zero and so forth, and technology deployment and development. I believe that should occur in concert with the national institutions, providing particular support if we have a particular difficulty or a certain issue, as and where necessary, as is occurring, let's say, in the case of Scotland, as we talked about with CCS. So that's the way in which I would view that type of problem. And I would just underscore again that the bill is providing a framework for dealing with these problems collaboratively across sectors, rather than, as I see it, in any way trying to place a very severe burden on agri and a relatively light burden on other sectors, which I don't think is the case, notwithstanding your very important points you raised. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Rosemary. John has indicated that his issue has been covered, so that being the case, then that's all the members. So can I just conclude this part of the session by thanking Dr. Munser and Dr. Brennan for covering all the issues as extensively as they have. So thank you very much indeed. And then can I just move on then by asking to seek agreement from the members to publish the paper from the EGNA on the committee's website? Okay, thank you. So move on then to item number 7 on the agenda, which is the oral evidence session, Horse Racing Amendment Bill, Down Royal Racecourse. So can I refer members to the briefing paper from Down Royal Racecourse at page 40, and also welcome via Starleaf Emma Meehan, Chief Executive Officer, and Robert Conan, who's the Director. You're both very welcome. Can I invite the representatives to take 5 to 10 minutes just to brief the committee? So it's over to yourselves.
Can I just, thank you very much. Can I just check you can hear me?
Yes, can indeed, loud and clear.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, good morning still, and thanks to the members of the committee on behalf of Down Royal Racecourse for your time this morning, and indeed the opportunity to speak with you directly. My name is Emma Meehan, and I am the Chief Executive of Down Royal Racecourse. I took over the role of this prestigious racecourse after many years operating a racecourse in the Republic of Ireland, bringing with me a wealth of experience and grave ambition for Down Royal's future. I am joined by Robert Conan, Director of Marion Property Group, the company who bought Down Royal in 2006. After 2006, Marion Property Group continued to provide a lease to the Corporation of Horse Breeders until the said lease did expire in 2019, upon which Marion Property Group took up the operation with me as the CEO. Since commencing as operators of the racecourse in January 2019, we have brought forward and carried out the same level of horse racing activities as the previous operator of the venue, however, have been ineligible for support from the Horse Racing Fund, and accordingly during the years 19, 20 and 21 we have ran the full racing calendar as granted by the racing body, Horse Racing Ireland, and permitted obviously by certain short-term COVID regulations. But despite the lack of access to the fund, it's very important to note we have invested circa 588,000 with regard to the infrastructure and health and safety measures, which were a requirement. Such was the level of underinvestment when we took over. The effects of COVID-19 have led to a 66% decrease in turnover, and during this time we've had to seek internal group loans to maintain the Grade 1 prize funds at Downroyal and invest as outlined. But this just isn't simply sustainable without access to the Horse Racing Fund. And in the context of an opening statement, I think it is prudent to stress the role of Northern Ireland's two racecourses, but most notably Northern Ireland's premier Grade 1 racecourse, which is Downroyal. A subsection within the Deloitte analysis of the equine industry 2019 states the economic value generated by both Downroyal and Downpatrick, plus the other point-to-point courses, in line with the actual attendees to those particular venues, is circa 9 million as a return to the economy. And this is further weighted by our contribution to the rural and agricultural sector and the direct correlation with breeding and training, with the Equine Council for Northern Ireland referring to the direct correlation between the successful running of racecourses and the production of thoroughbred horses. Therefore, if Downroyal is not named as a beneficiary of the fund, it would create significant adverse economic impacts, as such a failure would jeopardise, I suppose, the viability of Downroyal's contribution towards the economy, towards thoroughbred horse racing in Northern Ireland, alongside the industry activity and the wealth of jobs associated with the running of Downroyal Racecourse. We're very proud of our successes since we took over the operation in January 2019, which have directly supported the objectives of the fund. We have secured, and one I'm very proud of, stadium status within Northern Ireland. So we're now one of 3 stadiums of significant importance to Northern Ireland. We've increased attendances pre-COVID, obviously, but that was from a standing start. We gained an 80% increase in sponsorship investment, again from a standing start, and increased employment in tandem. We are so ambitious for a post-pandemic recovery. We aim to expand the existing racing calendar, increase attendances in line with our 2019 trajectory, and indeed increase employment in line with maturation of the business. But to ensure this, it is vital that we regain access to the Horse Racing Fund in a timely manner. And I suppose if any further delay was to happen with regard to that, it would negatively impact the sustainability of the racecourse. So I'm very happy to open the floor to questioning, and I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much. So can I just kick off before I go around the room to any other members who may have questions? Can I just ask you said there that you've been able to proceed with a full race calendar. Can I ask maybe, given the lack of access to the fund, what issues or what have you been unable to proceed with?
Well, nothing is the short answer, because we committed, obviously understanding that we wouldn't have access to the fund within the first year, to plug the deficit. And obviously historically the corporation would have used the funding, which was obviously in line with the objectives of the fund, which was either the money could be utilised for prize money, enhancing safety with regard to spectators, and technical aspects to ensure the safe conduct of racing. But what the corporation chose to do was to bolster the prize prize money for the Northern Ireland Festival of Racing, which historically happens within the autumn-winter period, which constitutes the Grade 1 profile of the racetrack, featuring the Grade 1 champion chase. And such was the deficit of money that we committed to plug that, and we did that through sheer endeavour. We have a 100% strike rate in terms of commercial sponsorship. We did that again from a standing start. We brokered deals with 56 new partners in terms of plugging that prize money deficit, because Grade 1 racing is so important to Downroyal. It's very important to the economy within Northern Ireland, and it's very important to bookmakers also, in terms of the turnover associated with such a flagship two-day festival. But going forward, it is our committal to do that. Obviously, we're very good at what we do in terms of this as a business. We would be committing to sustain that level of prize money, but we can only do that from a commercial standing if we have the fund in tandem, where we can then use that fund, to ensure that there is continued investment within the facilities, and to ensure the highest standards in terms of integrity with regard to the running here, and in terms of the integrity of the betting product that the bookmakers capitalise on in tandem.
Okay. Just in terms of the business model, I mean, you've explained it a wee bit there, but obviously you've very forcefully said what you will lose out on if this fund isn't acceptable or isn't given. In terms of measures that you've maybe taken to diversify income, could you maybe elaborate a bit more on that?
Well, I suppose it's important to stress that we've already invested 588,000. Such was the level of underinvestment upon taking over. As was the most notable conversation was with Lisburn and Castlereagh Council with regard to setting a minimum of standards that was in line with the safety of sports ground legislation. We had to look at the crush barriers in the main grandstand, anti-slip surfaces. We've had to replace the roof, so on and so forth. That accumulated in 588,000 in terms of investment within the first 12 months of commencing the operation. But in terms of diversifying the incomes, obviously the model is the model. In terms of it being a social contact business, we rely heavily on, I suppose, people coming to the site in terms of that contributing to our hospitality income, but it's been obviously we maintained that, and we increased those levels from a standing start in 12 months. But in terms of the ability to diversify our incomes, obviously COVID put a stop to that, and we are looking towards now our full attendances coming back in our two-day meeting in October, and looking to, I suppose, reflect the 2019 levels into 2021 without a full overview of, the economic impact of the pandemic, and diversification is just not something, that we can constitute at the moment until we get back on our feet.
Okay, thank you very much. Nobody else has indicated that they want to ask a question, so can I just thank you both, Emma and Robert, for coming along and making your presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just seek agreement then from the committee members to publish the briefing paper that we received today from Downroyal Racecourse on our committee website? Okay, thank you. So we're just moving on then to item number 8, which is the oral evidence session, Horse Racing Amendment Bill Downpatrick Racecourse. So can I refer members to the briefing paper, page 43, and can I welcome via Starleaf Peter Stewart and Richard Little, the chairperson and the manager. Oh, sorry, we also have Russell McNabb and Chris McAvoy. So can I ask the representatives just to take 5 to 10 minutes just to brief the committee, and then we'll open up to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Horse Racing Amendment Bill proposes changes to the Horse Racing Northern Ireland Order 1990 to enable the resumption of payments from the Horse Racing Fund to the racecourses operating at Downroyal and Downpatrick. The 1990 order specifically names the Governor and Freemen of the Corporation of Horse Breeders as the beneficial owner of Down Royal. The corporation no longer has ownership of Down Royal Racecourse, and therefore the current operators have been unable to receive fund payments since 2019. The main aim of the amendment bill is to rectify this situation. However, since the 1st of January 2019, the department has made no payments from the fund, despite Downpatrick lodging legitimate claims in excess of £500,000 for the years 2019, 2020 and 2021 to date. In or about 2019, the current operators of the racecourse at Down Royal made requests to the department for payments from the fund. Those requests were declined. The current operators at Down Royal suggested that payments from the fund contravened EU state aid laws. Since the EU state aid issue was raised, the department has not made any further payments to Downpatrick Race Club from the fund. Downpatrick Race Club has issued judicial review proceedings in respect of the department's decision not to process its claims. Therefore, while we are anxious to assist the committee today, you will appreciate that we may not be able to answer certain questions from you if we consider same to be sub judice or that they would prejudice our judicial review case. You have our written briefing paper on the 4 discrete issues that we were asked to comment on. We clearly state therein that we accept that the current operator of Down Royal does not qualify under the 1990 order, and that to make payment to them going forward, the amendment of the name of the operator is absolutely necessary. We also clearly state therein our position on the outstanding claims of the racecourse. We believe in that regard that the 1990 order is good law and that outstanding claims should be assessed by the department without further delay. Downpatrick Race Club Limited is a private limited company, limited by guarantee. It is a not-for-profit body, and its continued operation makes a large contribution to the local economy, directly and indirectly, and through increased employment in the equine industry. In recent years, facilities at the racecourse have improved dramatically for the horses, for the administrators, and for spectators, thanks, inter alia, to monies received from the fund. Unfortunately today, those improvements cannot continue. The race club is cash strapped. It has lost money in the years 2019 and 2020. It has had to use up cash reserves to keep going. Health and safety matters place increasing demands on us. COVID has further complicated matters, and our revenues have decreased considerably. Now, our manager can expand on that cash position if you would wish to hear him. So, Mr. Chairman, I leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'm just going to open it up to questions. And just before I do, can I just make it clear to both members and yourselves that we're here to talk today about the legislation and the bill, so we don't want to delve beyond that. So, Patsy, do you want to come?
Volume on there again.
Yep.
Gentlemen, just forgive I don't know your part of the world that well, or the racing fraternity that you represent. But could you clarify for me, please, the link commercially or otherwise that there is between yourselves, if any, and the previous Emma Meehan who spoke on behalf of Down Royal there?
Well, we're both racecourses in the north of Ireland. Our aim is to further racing throughout Ireland. We liaise in certain matters. Downpatrick Racecourse facilitates a different type of horse racing, probably to the maze. We are a national hunt course. The maze is certainly more inclined to deal with top class flat racing, as well as some national.
Okay, now, I'm clear. I'm not getting into illegal stuff at all, Chair. Could you clarify for me, do you support then the payments or sport payments to Down Royal as presently constituted?
Yes, we appreciate that the new operators, for want of a better word, at Down Royal should have access to the fund.
The same as
going forward.
Yeah. All right, that's okay. Just that was unclear from maybe my hearing wasn't particularly good in picking up what you were saying there. That's grand, Chair. That's all I want to clarify. Thank you, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. No other members seeking to ask questions, so I just want to thank the representatives for your attendance today. Thank you all very much for coming along. Okay, can I just seek agreement to publish the briefing paper from Downpatrick Racecourse on the committee website?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we're just going to... Chair, now, we're going to move on now to item number 9 in our pack, which is correspondence. So I refer members to the correspondence on page 46. We'd like to draw members' attention to the following items. Correspondence from the department at page 53, advising that it intends to undertake an 8-week consultation commencing on the 4th of October in respect of the introduction of a mandatory system for reporting sheep carcass classification and pricing system. Currently, there's only a voluntary arrangement in place. So, on this issue, members are asked to forward any questions on the consultation by close of play today, and for the clerk to seek confirmation in writing from the department whether it intends to consult on the use of enforcement powers under a mandatory arrangement. So, memo also there from the EU Affairs Officer, page 132, which provides an update on the implementation of the common frameworks and advises that all of the frameworks under ERA's remit have now been given provisional approval and are expected to be referred to the Assembly in late September or early October. The DEFRA Secretary of State has been quoted as saying that a realistic time frame for completion of the scrutiny process is March 2022. There's also correspondence from the Committee for Finance at page 145 on its call for evidence on the defamation bill, which has now reached committee stage. So members are asked to provide any comments to the clerk by the 30th of September, from which a return will be made on behalf of this committee. There's also correspondence from the NI Turf Guardians Association at page 18 of table papers, requesting the opportunity to give oral evidence to the committee on the horse racing amendment bill. The committee had initially agreed not to invite the association to give an oral briefing and has received an extensive written submission from the association through its call for evidence, and that will be provided to members as part of their deliberations on the bill report. So can I just ask, are members content that the clerk writes to the association advising that unfortunately due to scheduling demands it won't be possible to facilitate an oral briefing, but give assurances that the association's written evidence will be taken into account? Or would members like them invited for an oral briefing? I'm kind of asking members. Patsy, you have a question?
Here, all I wanted was a wee bit of clarity around the process. Whenever you're going, Turf Guardians there had almost got up and said the boys from the Sperns have been in touch with you. So, Chair, if I could just ask, in relation to all this issue, and it's kind of geographically outside my area, and I'm not as well across it as probably I should be, but those issues that have been raised by the two previous ones about Down Royal and Downpatrick, at what point are we going to have the departmental officials before us to discuss that and to discuss the way forward around that? Because it seems there's a legitimate case there that they have where they're doing a lot of money that they previously would have been receipt of because of the legalistic aspects of change or amendments to legislation that haven't been made that previously were in place while there was a different commercial operation in charge at Down Royal there. Now, I don't know what the issues of JR are, I just don't know. But at what point are we going to have those officials before us so we can maybe drill down a wee bit further on this, please?
I'm going to ask the clerk just to respond to that, Patsy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Patsy. So, Patsy, I suppose it's important at this point just to I think it's important to distinguish the two separate processes. So the committee has had the horse racing amendment bill referred to it for scrutiny, and we are undertaking that with a view that on the 7th of October to undertaking deliberations and decision making on that, and officials will be in attendance then, further to their attendance last week. I think it is also important to note and to clarify that there is also ongoing judicial review proceedings that have been launched by Downpatrick regarding with the department, and those are currently ongoing. So in many ways, that issue of the retrospective payments that have been withheld is separate to the actual work of the committee in scrutinising the amendment bill, if you like, albeit that the two things are happening at the same time. I suspect that has, where in the briefing from Downpatrick, that issue has been conflated with the consideration of the amendment bill as it is drafted.
Chair, I don't know whether the legal process is solely about retrospective payment or establishing the validity of what should be payments now, but I would really look forward to getting more information around this, and I look forward to that briefing from the officials.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
No bother. Just before the chair takes over the reins, can I just ask then, in terms of correspondence, are members then content to action the rest of the correspondence as suggested on the index sheet on page 47? Okay, we're all content. So I can ask the chair then to take over again at item number 10.
Okay, members, item 10 then is forward work programme. It's at page 151. Can I get agreement for the forward work programme? Okay. Okay, members. Okay, members. Item 11 here on the is the NER business. There's a number of other businesses I want for consideration. You recall that we discussed potential events to include and coincide with the COP26, and a suggestion was put forward to engage with schools and youth groups on an event. I've been advised that Collybaggy College, one of the schools that did a focus group in the call for evidence, is keen to participate in a question and answer session with committee members on the importance of COP26 and climate change generally. Are members okay for the clerk to proceed to firm up arrangement for such an event and to include potential participation from other school groups? And secondly, members, depending on progress made today with regards to deliberations on the climate change number 1 bill, the clerk has suggested holding an ad hoc virtual meeting on Tuesday, 20th September at 3:30 p.m. for an hour to continue deliberations. Can members please inform the clerk today if they're available? All right. You let Nick know by the close of play. And lastly, members, by way of a reminder, the carbon battle bus will be stopping at Parliament Buildings on Thursday, next Thursday, and we've been invited to go out and see it and have a photo opportunity at 10:45 a.m. And please, we can break the committee to go out and do that there. Please, we confirm members with Nick to the clerk today if he'll be available, and on site at Parliament Buildings next Thursday. One of the things that I want to suggest, if it's in order under AOB, is if we maybe could drop a wee letter to the RUAS, thanking them, well, commending them on the Balmoral show, and I'm sure it was fantastic yesterday. I'm sure it'll be fantastic for the next few days as well. But commending them and thanking them for their hospitality yesterday when we were up there. Up there, right? Okay. And do members have any other business they want to raise before we run to closed? Okay, I'm watching here. Okay, the next meeting then will be on Thursday, coming at half past 9, and it'll be a hybrid meeting streamed on the Assembly website. Okay, members, item number 13 then is the Climate Change number 1 bill, informal deliberations. First matter on it is declaration of a climate emergency. I want to inform members that the committee will now commence its deliberation on the climate number 1 bill on a subject matter basis. Members, you have been provided with papers in the pack at page 165 to support our considerations, including a copy of the bill at page 21 of table papers, the stakeholder analysis report, and a table of suggested amendments. Barbara Love, no stranger to the committee, from the Bill Office is following proceedings and will be available to the committee for a closed session at the end of the meeting should members wish to discuss options for amendments and instruction for drafting committee amendments. Members are reminded to propose amendments as we proceed through the clauses. These can be discussed with the Bill Clerk in closed session at the end of the deliberations. And I want to remind members this is not a formal clause by clause stage. Members, for the next few weeks, we have the opportunity to go through the clauses and discuss issues raised by stakeholders or committee members in order to help inform our deliberations and to consider any possible amendments. As we go through the clauses, I invite the bill sponsors or co-sponsors to consider or clarify any aspects of the bill as they are discussed. Are members okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, first set of clauses. Yeah, sorry,
Chair. Just given that this might be some of our first time actually going through the bill, I mean, could we maybe get just a wee brief explanation about the difference between the informal process that we're going through and the formal process?
Nick, can you pick up with that?
Chair, certainly, yes. So, Philip, I suppose the purpose of facilitating this time today and then over the next few weeks is to walk through each of the clauses the bill as drafted and really give members the opportunity to discuss and come to consideration on the bill as drafted on those certain clauses. It also will give members the opportunity to consider any potential amendments that they may wish to propose on those different clauses and aspects of the bill. And then after that process we've walked through of coming, I suppose, to having a debate and discussion on each of the clauses, there will then be the opportunity to undertake a formal clause-by-clause decision-making at the end of that process. So I suppose it's really to give members an opportunity to discuss each of the aspects of the bill in light of all the evidence that has been collected over the last few months.
Happy with that, Philip?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, members. Remember, the first area we'll consider is Clause 1 relating to the declaration of a climate emergency. A summary of the evidence that we have received on this and suggested amendments or issues are in the summary memo from the clerk at page 165. I want to remind members that questions and comments should be focused on specific clause under discussion. If members are content, then we'll make a start. Clause 1 legally declares a climate emergency from the date at which the Act is passed. Climate emergency shall continue till such times as there is verifiable proof from a relevant body, either the UKCCC or the IPCC or the Climate Advisory Council, that the Paris Agreement pledge or any other protocol under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change has been met. The emergency can only be annulled by a vote in the Assembly following a motion laid by the Executive. Clause 1 allows the Assembly to redeclare a climate emergency as required through a vote. Members, the majority of respondents to our call for evidence were supportive of the declaration of a climate emergency in the bill. The vast majority of organisations who responded were positive about this. However, some individuals and organisations highlighted this may be unnecessary and is not a feature of legislation elsewhere. Suggested issues and amendments on this clause, as detailed in the summary memo, include the definition could be expanded to include a nature or biodiversity emergency in addition to a climate emergency. Wording could be inserted to ensure that all public authorities take account of the climate emergency. There could be a greater clarity regarding what verifiable proof is needed to justify rescinding the emergency. The bodies listed under Clause 1, 2 need to be titled correctly. Clause 1, 3, the Executive Office cannot lay a motion in the Assembly, and this therefore should be amendment. Have members any comments or questions on this climate emergency clause? Okay, members. I'm going to go to the second set of clauses, and so you can, if you have any commentary, you can just fire it into the committee WhatsApp group here that I have beside me at the computer. We'll move on to the second set of clauses relating to the climate action plans. A summary of the evidence that we have received on this and related suggested amendments issues are in a summary memo from the clerk in the pack at 167. Members will recall the vast majority of respondents to our call for evidence had a positive view of climate action plans and considered them to be an effective pathway to deliver the emissions goals. Clause 2, 1, Clause 2, 3 to 5 set out that the Executive Office must lay before the Assembly climate action plans to achieve the climate objective and its responsibilities in undertaking appropriate consultation on the plans. The first action plan is to be laid within 3 years of the bill taking effect and thereafter every 5 years. Some of the issues highlighted within the clauses include that the first action plan should be laid within 24 months of the bill coming into effect. At Clause 2, 4, the reflection period should be extended following consultation to allow the plan to be amended if necessary. Carrying out a SAMBIT as a mandatory requirement when consulting on an action plan. Have members any comments on these clauses 2, 1 and clauses 3 to 5? And members, Clause 3 sets out the contents of the climate action plans, which include targets that are to be achieved in respect of greenhouse gas emissions, water quality, soil quality and biodiversity, as well as measures to meet these targets and sectoral plans for different industries. In our covered evidence, we hear that most respondents were positive about the proposed context of the climate action plans. We heard positive feedback about the inclusion of water, soil and biodiversity targets. Some respondents also highlighted where these were outside the scope of the bill. A strong theme of the call for evidence was that there should be greater emphasis and clarity placed on just transition within the plans. A full list of suggested changes and amendments to Clause 3 is contained in the memo. These include a suggestion that the climate action plan should make use of nature-based solutions, a more prescriptive obligation on the Executive Office to consult organisations with relevant expertise before setting the targets, explicit reference to the extractive and fracking industry as a source of nitrogen pollution, suggestions from the Department as to how Clause 3, 5 could be given greater clarity, inclusion of fisheries as a specific sector, strengthening or amending the just transition principles of Clause 3.8 in line with Scottish legislation, suggestion of providing for a specific just transition fund for agriculture, and clarifying the Department's responsibilities under Clause 3.10. Philip, members' questions. Philip, you want to ask a question or make a comment?
Yeah.
And John?
And I'm coming in now. I probably could have come in at some of the earlier discussions. As a kind of a general point, I mean, we obviously had some really useful evidence sessions from a broad range of individuals and organisations, and they put forward some compelling arguments. I'm just wondering, in terms of our role and expertise in scrutinising that, I mean, is there any way that we can potentially get identify some of them, lift them out and get Ray's or somebody else to look at maybe whether these are suggestions that are included in legislation elsewhere, maybe the impact of them. I mean, for example, there's lots of good suggestions about adding stuff into the bill, and I would have no difficulty with that. My only concern is that it actually narrows down the actual climate aspects of the bill, or gives other issues equivalent. So I'm just wondering, beyond actually taking the evidence and quizzing the people who give the evidence, is there another stage where we can interrogate some of those suggestions a bit further? Maybe there's not. I'm just asking that question.
Well,
Chair, no, Philip, I think certainly what, in relation to that point, I suppose the opportunity today is, if there are, what I've done in the summary memos is put forward all of the suggested amendments or additions that we've heard. And I suppose the opportunity for today is to discuss whether there would be broad support, for example, for the inclusion of such an element into the bill, and then potentially subject to any further clarification or research that we could commission. So I suppose the opportunity here today is to discuss those, if any of those suggested amendments or issues that have been highlighted throughout the call for evidence need to be looked at, and what, if any, further action the committee would wish to take with regards to those, and we would seek to do that.
Okay.
So can I ask a question?
yeah, go ahead, Chair.
So I'm looking at, do you mean then, again, I'm new to this as well, so if I'm not in the right place here, please just let me know. But for example, when we're looking at suggested amendments with the climate action plans, that one, it says the time frame for laying the first climate action plan before the Assembly should be reduced to between 12 and 24 months of passage of the legislation. Are we looking at those types of suggestions that we've heard through evidence, and looking at whether we want to investigate that more, or whether we would support that as an amendment as a committee?
Claire, yes. So I suppose the purpose of today is to say, look, that issue or that suggested amendment has been put forward by a stakeholder. Is the committee broadly supportive, or doesn't want to look at that, or where does the committee stand on those suggested amendments, or is it happy with, in broad terms, with the bill, with the clauses drafted, without making a formal decision on it?
Yeah. Okay.
Chair,
Yeah, Patsy?
could just suggest, I think maybe I moved it last week, but is there an intention at some stage where Claire's bill and the departmental bill, that there will be sort of a crib sheet, a tick box of where it complies one with the other, or where they both meet, and where they both are, or where they vary one from the other, to see what sort of basically basic politics can be worked around that, so that if there are options or amendments that can be introduced that meet those needs, or well, maybe don't meet those needs, that we can at least see that on a clear sheet, where the two bills are at variance and where they most of the time do agree.
Yeah. That would be helpful for our exploration at least.
Would indeed.
So Chair, yes, indeed. The committee team can provide that, and I suppose just to advise Chair members that we are considering the Climate Change Bill number 1, and the committee will have to report on each bill that stands before it on its own merits and considerations. Notwithstanding, of course, that there will have to be a process of comparison and discussion on that at some point. The second stage debate of the minister-sponsored bill is on Monday, and I would suggest that thereafter it may be then prudent to bring forward a summary of how the two bills compare. But nevertheless, the committee, I suppose, has to take a decision and consideration on the bill before it today, in and of itself.
Chair, my reason for doing that and suggesting that is it's quite exceptional to have two bills with ostensibly the same objective before us simultaneously. And there may well be, if we look at a crib sheet or a comparator like that, it may well inform us as to what amendments may be useful or helpful in advancing that further. That's me thinking behind that, be it unusual or not, but I just simply haven't been in this situation before, albeit been about the Assembly, as many others have here too. It's to facilitate the process more than anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So,
Chair, sorry, if you don't.
Go ahead. Sorry.
If you don't mind, just to confirm the members that the Minister-sponsored bill has not yet been formally referred to committee stage.
Yes.
And I suppose certainly if it should pass, we would endeavour to provide members with a summary information in order to enable that comparison. I suppose the purpose of building in time to look at the private members' bill is to afford members the opportunity to come to a broad agreement in principle on the merits of it in and of itself, and that may influence any future decision making with regards amending or clarifying parts of other legislation. But as I say, in order to ensure that the private members' bill is treated on its own merits, the opportunity is for the members to discuss the suggested amendments that have been put forward for it.
Okay. Okay, so members have more questions or comments on this?
I had a quick comment there.
John, sorry, I had you on the list here. Sorry about that, John. Sorry.
Yeah, you're absolutely okay, and I have no problem with what was being discussed there as well from Patsy, just as a point of reference and a bit of a steer. I think that would be very useful. I wanted to point out, you'll not be surprised, Chair, me coming in with this one. Fisheries is mentioned there at the end of page 170. No problem at all in principle with that, but you will be aware, Chair, that there's a distinct difference between inland fisheries and sea fisheries, including governance, arrangements, jurisdictional issues. For sea fisheries, for example, entirely different than inland waters. And when it comes to transboundary issues in relation to that, there are fisheries which have a boundary running through them. And very obviously rivers that straddle boundaries and borders, but also specifically a lake that has the border in the middle. So I think that might need some detail added. I don't want to bog people down with detail, but there could be a risk in being too general with that one.
Okay. Thank you, John. Rosemary? Rosemary?
Yeah, thank you. So let me get my head around these two bills. We are going to listen to evidence eventually now for the second bill, Bill 2. We're going to go through the same process for Bill 2. So reporting then will be separate for Bill 1 and Bill 2. And then the process then starts after that to see if there are any points that are similar and try and bring the two bills together. Is this what I'm gathering?
Yeah. Do you want to come in there on that, Nick?
Thank you, Chair. So, Rosemary, yes, I suppose on the face of it, that's absolutely correct in the sense we have to take separate twin track processes for each of the bills. So we will have to go through the same process to gather evidence, collate information, and come to deliberations and formal decision making on each bill as drafted. There will then, of course, whenever there's a considered and final position on each of those bills, there will have to be, I suppose, a discussion about how this committee reports back to the Assembly on its overarching considerations as to what the harmonised position, if any, should be. But nevertheless, given that the private members bill is with us at committee stage, and should the climate change bill pass second stage, the committee will have to produce 2 separate reports on its considerations and matters on each bill.
Right, okay, thank you.
Okay, Rosemary?
Yes?
Thank you. Happy enough for that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so members are happy enough to move on to look at the clause 4. Okay. Members, clause 4 sets out the process for reporting climate action plans. Progress reports are to be laid with the Assembly on an annual basis and should include whether the target has been achieved, recommendations if there has been a failure to meet a target, and relevant information to support the climate objective. In terms of suggested changes or issues with clause 4, the department has highlighted there's no consequence for a public body should there be a failure to meet a climate action plan target. And clause 4.1 should specifically state who is responsible for preparing and laying the annual reports. Have members any comments or questions in relation to clause 4? Okay.
Chair.
Yeah. No.
I'm just looking at the report that and the stakeholder report, and just after clause, it's specifically mentioning in there with the stakeholder feedback about after clause 4 insert just transition fund for agriculture, and then that's sort of out there as well. I think just in light of the evidence that we've just heard, for example, when we were hearing about the work the Scottish Government are taking in conjunction with the Just Transition Commission that they established, and now being able to secure, for example, 40 million from the UK government to allow agriculture to transition. I think that would be a really good suggestion, something that I'd be really interested in looking at.
Yeah, Philip.
Aye. I'm sorry. This is I maybe didn't put my point earlier in the best way, because Claire's highlighted something. I support the just transition and would like to see that aspect of the bill clarified. I was kind of waiting until the closed session, you see, to ask some of these questions of Barbara, because if there was a couple of suggestions. So, for example, strengthening or amending the just transition principles at clause 3 in line with the Scottish legislation, and then there was another one, suggestion of providing for a specific just transition for agriculture. So, obviously, if we're strengthening just transition, that includes agriculture. So, these are the kind of questions that I wanted to ask in terms of all issues, but particularly in this issue we're talking about, my support for strengthening just transition. What is competent within the bill and what supersedes another issue that has been raised. So, example, if we strengthen just transition, then we don't need a just transition for agriculture, because agriculture will be included along with all the other sectors. So, essentially, we just need to strengthen the just transition principles. But in general, I support both, if you know what I mean. But I just wanted to talk over the issues for inserting whatever particular clause into the bill with Barbara during the closed session.
Yeah, Patrick?
Yeah, Chair, thanks very much. It's in a similar vein, or though maybe coming at it from a slightly different direction. It's the Just Transition Fund for Agriculture. If in fact that covered all bases of those who are going to require the transition fund and transition support, I'm thinking agriculture in its definition alone, does that include agri-food? I'm thinking of, there are sectors, as I just look around me, who rely upon agriculture, and indeed who may be subsidiaries of agriculture, but I don't know whether specific to agriculture, if in its outwork on that would cover them, because they need to be transitioned. So it's in a similar vein of thinking to Philip's there. I think we need to do a wee bit more dig down on that to see if in fact that clause would adequately cover the people whom we're thinking of and the people whom we've heard evidence from.
Yeah, absolutely, Pastor. Yeah, noted. That's been noted. Nick, yes?
Chair, yes, maybe if I could make a suggestion, Chair, that if we go through the clauses that we had proposed to cover today, we'll make a list, and then whenever we move into closed session, perhaps to provide an opportunity to discuss those matters more in depth, if that would be deemed reasonable.
Yeah. Happy enough with that, members?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, members, clause 11 then provides for the alteration of climate action plans, outlining the responsibility of the Executive Office to lay a response to an annual progress report with the Assembly within 2 months. Response should address any failure to deliver on the targets or in relation to the implementation of sectoral plans, or sponsor any recommendations and proposals for alteration of targets. Alterations to climate action plans must be approved by the Assembly. Members, any comments in relation to clause 11? Alteration of climate action plans, annual report, and must be approved by Assembly. Members, any comments in relation to that one? Okay. Well, I suppose if there's any comments, we can pick up someone with Barbara as we move on to the next session. That'd be fair enough. Okay. Well, members, so we're going to move into closed session now to look at the informal deliberations, and we're going to adjourn the meeting and just move into the closed session. Now, can you let us know whenever we're out of broadcasting?
Just give me 1 second, Chair.
Ireland Assembly Committee Room.